Don't play in the park at night. It was about a few years after Mr. I had joined the company. He went out for drinks with a group of his peers, a year his senior, or a year his junior. There were no senior employees or bosses. It was a very carefree and free drinking party. We had so much fun that we all drank until the night. As they went to 2 or 3 restaurants, they all got drunk. It was just like a manga or a drama. Wow, you're such an asshole, or something like that. They leaned on each other and staggered around, almost hitting trash cans and plants on the street corner. It really was such a horrible state of affairs for a human being. Even though they were drunk, they were not students anymore. He was able to make that kind of decision as a member of society. After leaving the last restaurant, all the participants staggered home. Even though we were working people, we were still drunk and stoned. There were 5 or 6 of us going home in the same direction, and we were completely out of control because we were going home on a quiet street away from the residential area. In hindsight, we were a pretty ugly bunch of drunks, Mr. I said, reflecting on the situation. There's a park on our route to and from work. There is a park on our route to and from work. It's just a normal park with playground equipment and a sandbox over here and a little plaza over there. It's not a park. It's a park. It's a park. After one of them said something incomprehensible and went into the park, the others also went into the park late at night. We could have played on the playground equipment or lounged on the grass, but alcohol is a terrible thing. It makes you act in ways you don't understand. Mr. I went to the square and suddenly announced, "I'm going to go to the park." Hi. Now, Daruma-san ga kororundada. Daruma-san ga kororundada. My co-workers were also affected by the alcohol. Oh, let's do it, let's do it. They agreed with the declaration. Mr. I, the initiator of the event, somehow became the first demon in the atmosphere of the place. He moved to the back of the square, leaned his body against the pillar of the lantern, and turned his back on his classmates. He turned his back on his peers and shouted, Daruma-san ga kororunda. I turned my back to my peers. The man and the woman are both squishy, and they don't move at all anymore. They were too drunk to stop properly. In the first place, no one wants to stand still properly, nor do they want to play seriously. The ones who try to stop somehow, but end up moving with a glare. The one who dares to challenge an impossible position and almost falls down. The one who walks unsteadily to the entrance of the park. Whenever Mr. I played Daruma-san ga kororunda, this one, indeed, is not that one. This was really fun because we were being silly. I couldn't stop. Or rather, I was so drunk that I just laughed and laughed and laughed, and I didn't know when to stop. The shouting of Mr. I, the demon, became more and more rude. The play of the drunkards became more and more unsightly. When Mr. I turned around after playing Daruma-san ga kororunda for the umpteenth time, something strange was happening behind him. For what seemed like the umpteenth time, I turned around and saw something strange happening behind me. At the entrance of the park, I was a little cautious, because someone had just tried to leave the park, and I was wondering if someone would try to do the same thing again. There, someone was standing there. Mr. I came to his mind, but he continued with inertia. I knew he was a young man of the same age as us, We were at this distance, but I had no idea what he was wearing. Before I knew it, the man was holding what looked like a pure white sheet in his hands. He was holding it with both hands, gripping the edges of it and spreading it out in front of his body, so I couldn't see his body at all. A slight breeze was blowing, but not only was the man's body not moving, but his sheet was not fluttering in the wind either. His hands were resting on his shoulders, so I could see him from the neck up, and his face. The man was smiling in a way that seemed out of place. This is scary, isn't it? That's when Mr. I finally came to his senses. Now that I've had a good look at the man, I feel like I don't know what he's going to do or what will happen to him if we end the party like this. With my head beginning to sober up, I thought, well, let's play Daruma Rotor one more time, briefly, and be done with it. No matter how agile I was, there was no way I could fly this distance in a few seconds. I'll just pretend I don't know what to do and say, hi, that's it. Let's go home and collect everyone and leave the park without a care in the world. Mr. I faced the pillar of the nightlight for just a moment, determined to turn around immediately without waiting 2 seconds. I turned around in an instant. It was the first time I had ever seen a man with a white sheet over his head. He stretched out his arms and clung to me, confused. Mr. I frantically shook off the arm and ran off at once. He couldn't care less about his colleagues anymore. He felt more fear than fear for his life. Mr. I ran past his colleagues, out of the square, and out of the park. As he was stumbling and running, breathing hard in the middle of the road near the park, he was suddenly called out. Terumas Fallen. I turned around and saw the guy at the entrance approaching me. While the other participants were stumbling or sitting on the ground, he was standing perfectly still. It was hard to tell because he was still far away and there wasn't much light on him, but he looked to be about our age. He looked like a man, but since his brain couldn't make a proper judgment, Mr. I said, what the hell? Is he just jumping in? That was all he could think of. Maybe someone who was strolling around the area was having fun, so he joined in. Daruma fell down. I looked back. I turned around. The guy was getting pretty close. He was close enough that I could touch him if I played Daruma Around 5 more times. The man was quite far away from Mr. I at first, but he was closing the distance so quickly that I didn't know how he did it. Mr. I was impressed with how fast the general participants were moving, but he also found it a little strange. I was impressed by how fast the general participants were moving. Normally, when someone I don't know joins the party, I would say, who, or there's more people. But they didn't do anything, and yet, they don't say anything. Daruma Daa. I shouted briefly and turned around to see that the man was already about 10 meters away from me. How can people move so fast? It was the first time I saw the man approaching me closely. What are you doing? I looked over to see my still red-faced, but very sober colleagues all standing behind me. I reflexively looked behind them, but the man from earlier was not there. No. There was that guy in the park with the white sheet on. White sheets. My co-workers all said they didn't know anyone like that. There was no such guy. We were the only ones, right? From the way they were talking, it seemed that they hadn't even seen the man who had come through the doorway. They also didn't see the guy pull the sheet over his head and attack Mr. I. To her co-workers, it looked as if Mr. I, who was standing by the nightlight, suddenly ran screaming. He said, "I was wondering what happened to you when you suddenly ran out. You've had too much to drink, haven't you?" I couldn't believe that was a hallucination. I mean, I was touched by that guy, wasn't I? How can a hallucination touch you? There was no point in making any defenses. At that time, it was decided that Mr. I was drunk and temporarily lost his mind, and we broke up. A few days later, the road in front of the park was one of his routes to and from work. In the morning, she dragged her still sleepy body to walk in front of the park. A little way from the entrance of the park, there is a bulletin board where notices from the town and city are posted. It has a glass door and is designed to withstand the wind and rain. There was a suspicious person information posted among the announcements of bazaars and school events. I'm sure this wasn't there about a week ago. Mr. I read the notice with this in mind. On the night of XX, a person wearing a white sheet on his head appeared near this park. The person suddenly clung to a person who was walking by the park. Mr. I felt a chill run down his spine. This can't be it. Maybe he came out because of our play? Since that day, Mr. I has changed his commuting route and stays away from the area around the park.